we are at Mining Indaba 2026, and I am speaking to Veronica Bolton Smith, who's the CEO of the Critical Minerals Africa Group. Veronica, always great to chat to you.
Thank you, Gerald. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Now, in a recent edition of Mining Review Africa, you stated in an article that Africa needs to take responsibility for its own mining future. So how do we do that?
Well, I think that comes down to a few things. One is that we need to be very clear and intentional about how we want to utilize these minerals. So firstly, we know that we want to use minerals to industrialize. And that's what I'm saying about taking ownership, is that we know that Africa's challenges are very different to the rest of the world's. We're quite unique in that way. Our opportunities and our challenges are unique, I should say. And I think if we want to industrialize as a view, with a 20-30-year view in mind, where we know that our population surge will increase exponentially, 2.6 billion will be living on the continent, then industrialization is a key component to Africa's future. So minerals must be used to make sure that we can industrialize. And I think then we have job creation and we have economic growth. So that's really vital for me, and that's where I'm coming from, rather than Africa being, guided down the path of what is critical for other markets. Right. I think the definition of criticality must first and foremost be defined by those countries that exist within the continent. And wherever there are opportunities for regionalization and partnerships, even more so, because that will then attract and crowd in investment, because investors always look at market size. So the bigger the market, the better opportunities there are for investors.
Absolutely. Talk to me about some of the challenges that investors face in the African mining sector that dissuade them from putting their cash into the continent.
I mean, it's the usual story of corruption, but that's rife all over the world. It's a global problem, not an African one. But I think there are perceived risks and real risks, and I think there's a disconnect between what those are. I think Africa's narrative has been quite a negative one over the last certainly 30 years. There's always a focus on the wars, the pestilence, the famine. But actually, and this is kind of why I got into this space. I am African, and so living out in the UK as a member of the diaspora, I was very disappointed that the reality of what's going on the ground, the trade that is going on, the mass investment that's going on, the infrastructure build, the high rises that are going up, is not reflected in the media. And I think that's one of the reasons why, investment isn't free flowing all the time, and there is that perceived risk. I think some of the other challenges are things like, we are still developing here. We are building our roads, our rail, our ports. It's very exciting though, because there's some new things coming around, like transport corridors like the Lobito. Right. And Liberty Corridor, Guinea to Liberia. From that, we might see other opportunities come in. And I think other challenges that perhaps may dissuade investors is that, policy, governance frameworks and incentive frameworks are not always a combined effort when thinking about bringing in investors. So I think it's that combination of private and public sector collaboration that needs to be, kind of more in force. But I think those are the things that investors look at when they're looking at an investment market. Also things like Forex challenges. So when you're trying to, move money across borders, I think that's challenging too. And also sometimes the lack of power. Power is a real backbone of growing industry, encouraging investment in. So cheap, reliable power is still lacking. Things are being worked on. I've just come from a meeting where I was hearing from one of the DFIs investing in a transmission and distribution network. Another has invested in interconnectors to encourage more investment, more special economic zones. So these things are coming slowly, but we want it to be faster so as to attract more investment.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the Lobito Corridor, and that's a great example of cross-border collaboration. How can we encourage more of these partnerships on a regional level to ensure that it benefits the continent?
Yeah, I think, look, what I've recognized, and it's been discussed a lot during the Mining Indaba week, has been, how can transport corridors be a catalyst for furthering investment or potentially the opportunity for Africa to capitalize on this kind of geopolitical interest on the continent. And I'm all in favor of building infrastructure. If our geopolitical partners want to come here and build transport corridors, well and good. But we must first understand what we want to see alongside those transport corridors so as to attract more investment. So things like special economic zones will be vital for the lifeline, creating jobs and opportunities across the three countries. I think investment in further railway spurs will be really vital. So we've heard of one spur that runs from Zambia down to South Africa, which would then allow, the Southern African market to really open up and develop from the transport corridor. I think people often think of the Lobito as being a pure mineral railway run, but actually it could be, the ship that launched, the ship that launched 1,000, no, that's not right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be an opportunity because I think, from my perspective, you've got opportunities with technology, data centers, agro-processing. A lot of opportunities could come from the development of this transport corridor. So, yeah, I'd like to see us thinking more broadly and on a regional level, how we can collaborate more and build on this infrastructure that's being put in so as to attract more opportunities for growth, economic growth and jobs.
Absolutely. One final question, Veronica. Let's talk about the issue of skill shortages, particularly in the mining sector. And, Africa has got a very young population as well. So how do we start upskilling young people so that they can be employed in the African mining sector?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think for me, it's around being really intentional about where you want your country, what's the direction that you want to go in, what industries already exist that could be further accelerated by some of the mineral resources that the country has, or what does your neighbour have that you can then add value to. These are conversations that need to be had because when you're kind of developing this roadmap and strategy, it's with a vision that actually you're going to have a number of people in jobs created by the industries that you're growing. So through that, you're then able to identify what technical skills you need, what technical colleges you might need. And I think it's really important for African countries to invest in their youth and in those and building those skills from within. We advocate at CMAG, Critical Minerals Africa Group, for the use of sovereign wealth funds, for example, to reinvest back into infrastructure build, but certainly on the capacity development and technical skills side. I believe China, the number currently is, but they churn out about 100,000 mining engineers a year.
Wow.
So we have, quite a way to go still, but, that's just the ambition. So we really need to sort of meet these, what's coming down the line early on, start preparing and put in the right framework to enable us to grow properly.
Absolutely. Well, Veronica, always great to hear your insights. Thank you for joining us on Mining Review Africa today.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.